welcome to Good Grief, the podcast dedicated to demystifying and destigmatizing grief with compassion and humor. I'm Nikki. I'm an end-of-life doula and a grief coach in Columbus, Ohio. And today we're going to talk about defense mechanisms in grief. I'm happy you all are here. I have already had an episode drop, but this is the first episode I recorded after my break. So my brain is a little mushy. I had quite an adventure all of December, and it's just a little weird getting back into the swing of things again. So happy to be here. I'm always happy to have this podcast. It's a little isolating back here because it's typically just me and the microphone, and I don't frequently hear from my listeners. When I do, it's good. So thank you. I appreciate you. And even if you don't say a word, I know there are people out there listening, and that makes me happy. So that's why I keep doing this. All right. Before we dive in, I have to, do my thing and remind all of you about my Patreon. If you would like to support me and all that I do, it would be so appreciated. I don't make any money on this podcast through any other means. I don't get ad revenue. I'm not getting a kickback from any sponsors, nothing like that. So it's up to my patrons to help me keep this podcast running. And with those funds, I also provide pro bono work to those who cannot afford my services. So little as $1 a month, you can get some grief affirmations. You get I post funny memes because that's who I am. And for, higher tiers, you can get access to this podcast a week early, Q&As, and other things as I throw them out there in the world. If you really want to be awesome and go up to the highest tier, you can get a free coaching session each month with me. Patreon.com/Nikki the Death Doula. I don't know if I've mentioned it on my show here, but I started an online community for caregivers. I won't go into the whole thing. I could do a whole episode, and I probably will do some episodes on caregiving coming up. But I obviously work with a lot of caregivers, and I constantly just hear over and over again that caregiving is so isolating. I feel so alone. I feel like I'm going through this alone. And I thought, support groups are great, but the biggest problem, especially with caregiving, is it's hard to maintain a consistent schedule. So getting to those support groups is difficult. Finding time to make the phone calls is difficult. So I wanted to have a nice virtual space where people can come in and out as they are available and able and support each other. And we do have periodic support groups on Zoom. So the link to that, I'll put the link to that in the description, but if you go to my website, it's there as well. I post it all over my social media all the time, so you can find it there. But I would love to have you stop by and check that out. Say hi, and if you're a caregiver, you're amazing. Caregiving is no joke. Okay, enough of that. That's not why you're here. We are here to talk about defense mechanisms with grief. This is a big meaty topic, and I could do 20 episodes on all the minutia of this. But this is psychology speaking. This is our brain workings. And defense mechanisms they're big meaty subjects. I have had long conversations with some of my prior therapists on defense mechanisms because I use lots of them. And we're all guilty of that from time to time. And that's okay. I'm not going to sit here and say defense mechanisms are bad. They're not. To put it in its most simple phrase, they're just behaviors or patterns that we use to protect ourselves from unpleasant thoughts and emotions, right? Nobody likes to feel the icky feels. And again, I try not to use the words good or bad when it comes to describing emotions. Emotions just are what they are. It's how we respond to them and how they feel within us. And some of them feel icky, and we don't want to feel icky. Feeling icky is no fun. So we use a lot of these defense mechanisms as just kind of a way to protect ourselves from feeling icky with these big feelings. And what's a bigger feeling than grief? And these are things that we might even use all the time without even realizing we're doing it. So let's kind of talk about just some of the common defense mechanisms that you probably already know about and understand a little better and are used within grief. So first one would be denial. And it ain't just a river in Egypt, right? Denial is very common, and it is in the, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross book, The 5 Stages of Grief. But as you well know, if you've listened to this podcast for any period of time, that is not meant for grief within loss. That her book and studies were all about people who are dying. And anyway, neither here nor there. But denial is a big one, and it's real easy for us to do this. And even if you think to yourself, oh, I'm fully aware of the fact that I'm grieving. I don't deny it whatsoever. There might be times when you do. You know, your coworker comes up after you're back from bereavement leave and they say, hey, how you doing today? And you're like, oh, I'm fine. Thank you so much for asking. Are you fine though? And that might not be in your brain. You're not denying it, but you're not exactly coming out immediately with I hurt right now. I'm hurting a lot and this sucks. And again, it's not necessarily a bad thing, because I don't know about your coworkers, but do you really want to get into that deep of a subject with a coworker? Maybe you don't. So that's just your way of kind of saying, I appreciate you. I don't really feel like discussing this at this time. I don't know. But either way, denial is a pretty common one I think we all need. And this can be super simple. It can be, again, just, I'm fine. Thank you so much for checking in on me, to, you know what, this loss was no big deal. It's great. I'm going to move on and life is going to be perfect. That's a big denial. Because if you've listened to this show or know anything about grief, we don't get over it. And to lie to ourselves to say that it's all going to be fine, it's good, we're just going to move on, and that's that, is doing ourselves a huge, huge disservice. If I had my own tagline, it would be, you got to feel it to heal it. You know, you got to go through those feelings. You can't just brush them away and they'll disappear. It's not how that works. So denial is a pretty simple but pretty big one. It can even be as much as, someone offering help and you say, nope, I don't need any. I'm good, thanks. Regression. Regression's a good one. Simple way to put it. I mean, it's right there in the word regress, but it's a way of regressing back to earlier stages of development in the way we display our emotions. You could consider this immature or maybe insecure behavior. So, but it doesn't necessarily have to mean, laying on the floor, kicking your feet and screaming and crying. But this can come with denial, like, nope, I'm good. Leave me alone. I'm fine. Everything's gonna be fine. Just leave me alone. Stop talking about it. That's kind of a like crossing your arms or sticking your fingers in your ears going la la la. That's what regression is. Shutting down, withdrawing, or even going the opposite direction, getting really clingy with your friends and family, or even just straight up acting childish, hiding in bed and saying, I'm not going to get out, you cannot make me. Or just the good old sticking your fingers in your ears going la la la. Regression doesn't have to be a really bad thing. It's just another defense mechanism. And again, I'm going into all these, explaining what they are. There are ways any of these can go too far. If you experience any of these, it's normal and it's okay. Okay, so don't feel bad about yourself. Don't think you're crazy. Don't think you need to be stuck in a loony bin or anything. These are things that we all do in varying levels. It's when it starts impacting your life is when it's a problem and when you might need to seek help. So if you want to hide in bed and say, nobody can make me get out of this bed today, then you stay in that bed. You stay in that bed today. All right, another defense mechanism, projection. This is a big one, and this is one that can be damaging in interpersonal relationships. So when you have thoughts or feelings that are impacting you negatively or that are feeling icky inside, instead of acknowledging them or saying, you know what, I'm hurting real bad today, you're going to blame someone else. You're going to attribute this to someone else. So let's say I'm just having a real hard time dealing with the loss today, and my husband is trying to help me, but I don't want him to, and I just start going off on him. You are constantly nagging me. You're always in my face. You're always bothering me. Why don't you just leave me alone? If you would just leave me alone, I wouldn't be so angry right now. Am I angry because he's offering to help? No, I'm angry because I'm hurting, but I'm projecting that onto him. I'm saying that he's the problem. It's not me. He's bothering me too much. And you can see this a lot in grief where you project that onto the person or thing that you've lost. And it might not be any fault of their own, right? It's just what happens. Somebody gets cancer and they pass away, and you're mad at them for leaving you. You're mad at them for not being in your life anymore. That's projecting that hurt onto them and not just coping with the fact that you're hurting right now. And this is another one that is way more common than people think. Because like I said, it's not always just like, it's your fault I'm upset. But sometimes people say this about people they've lost. If he wasn't dead, if he just would have not died, or if he just would have not left me, everything would be okay. Is that true? I mean, obviously I can't say, but you're putting your hurt feelings onto somebody else when it's, you that's hurting. And again, these are defense mechanisms. This is your brain and your psyche's way of protecting yourself. So it's not inherently bad. It's what we do with it and how we work with these things and how we express them is when the problems can come in. If you're constantly blaming other people all the time, that's hurtful to them. It's only going to hurt you because you're not dealing with your own emotions at that time. And it could ruin other relationships, which could add more subsequent losses on top. So it's how we cope with these things and how we use these emotions. There's when the problem comes in. Okay, another one we have that's very similar is displacement. Displacement is a little similar. This is basically taking those feelings and putting them somewhere where they don't need to be. You're taking them out on another person or an object. So a good way to describe this, first of all, it's perfectly natural and okay to feel angry. Let's just say that you have lost a partner to cancer. I use cancer a lot because that's a lot of the loss I deal with in my profession. But let's say you've just lost somebody to cancer, and it's perfectly valid to be mad, to be angry that they're gone. And of course you're angry. And you can be angry at cancer for existing. I'm angry at cancer for existing. That's perfectly okay. But it's when you start displacing that anger onto other people and things. And, again, this is very, very similar to projection, but it's just taking that feeling out and putting it on another thing and then just leaving it there for all time. You're mad at, let's say your partner, you lost your partner to lung cancer. And it turns out that the facility they were working in had chemicals there that were known to cause lung cancer, and the company didn't realize it, and people got sick there, right? Of course you can be mad at the company, but to just spend all your time and energy being angry at that company, suing them, taking them for everything they can, picketing outside their facility, of course it's okay to be angry, and of course it's okay to want to take action, especially if they've hurt people. But to focus all of your time and energy on that anger and that hate is not going to ease your grief. It's okay to use activism. It's okay to speak out on things that have, on injustices in the world. But if you just don't focus any energy on healing yourself at the same time, and you're only displacing all your feelings onto this, that's where a problem can come in. You have to focus on your own hurt, and you have to work through your own grief. You can do both. It's hard. It takes work, and you have to take time off one to do the other. But you have to work on yourself too. Okay, now a super fun one. Intellectualization. It's a big, long, fancy word. And oh boy, howdy have I done this one. A lot of us have. We might not have realized it. We can be very, very guilty of intellectualizing our grief. A good example would be just throwing yourself full into everything in and of grief. I'm going to read all the manuals, and I'm going to learn how to get through this grief. I'm going to become an expert in getting over my grief. By doing this, you're avoiding contact with your feelings. You're avoiding dealing with those emotions by trying to quantify them or intellectualize them. You're putting them in neat little boxes, but they're still there. You can organize your thoughts and your feelings and your grief to kingdom come, but they're still there. They're just in pretty boxes now. So don't pause working or talking about your feelings to get a master's degree in the processing manuals of grief. I don't know. I'm just pulling stuff out of my ear here. But if you're not examining your emotions and keeping them as far away from you as possible by studying them, you're doing yourself a disservice with that. And again, it's a defense mechanism. These are things we do, but you got to feel it to heal it. So that's intellectualization. All right, just a couple more. There's undoing. This is something I am so guilty of. I do this all the time. When you maybe have used any of these other defense mechanisms I mentioned previously, you've taken your anger out on somebody else, or you've done something to negatively impact somebody in your life, or even just had bad thoughts about them, then you feel bad. Then you feel guilty. And then you want to undo that action by doing the complete opposite thing and going all in with being super nice, super friendly, super kind, and just, I'm going to reverse this. I'm going to make it better. This is not only the example I just gave, but the bigger way this tends to play into our grief is when, I'll be open and honest. Here's another great example. The last things I said to my brother before he died, I didn't know he was going to die. And the final few things I said to him were not very nice. I have that with me for the rest of my life. And yeah, I feel guilty about that. But if I spend my entire life not forgiving myself, but working real hard to make up for it, I'm doing myself a disservice with that. I also see so much in the clients that I work with, unfinished business and regrets they have and amends they never made before this point where they're at their end of their life. And it's hard. And I have to help them find a way to work through their unfinished business or their regrets. It might be straightforward. It might not be. But even if it's just as simple as forgiving yourself, that's huge. That's not simple. I don't know why I said that's simple. Forgiving yourself is a huge step in working through these feelings of regret. So that's what a lot of undoing is. And again, it's when you hyper focus on these things is when they become a problem. Now, the last defense mechanism I'm going to mention is, this one is tend to be viewed as the best, and it's super positive, and it is. Again, there are ways that this one can go too far, but this is sublimation. And sublimation is when you channel all that hurt and trauma and grief from your loss into positive and acceptable experiences or outlets. A great example is, I have mentioned a few times on this podcast, I'm on the board of directors for a nonprofit that provides support for women who have suffered pregnancy or infant loss. And Cammie, who I've had on the show, go back and find that episode, she had her own experiences with pregnancy loss. And she was lost and alone and scared. And because of everything she went through, she channeled all that trauma and grief and hurt and created this nonprofit so other women don't have to feel alone and they don't have to go through this by themselves. What an amazing thing to do with your grief. I had Hope Rieger of Grief to Hope on this podcast as well. Her son was murdered, and she could have just been angry and bitter and hidden in her room for the rest of her life, but she created Grief to Hope, an organization to help people work through their grief. These are beautiful, beautiful ways to advocate and support other people. I have suffered many losses, and the losses I've suffered, I feel, are part of the reason I'm doing what I do as a grief coach and a doula. That's great. I can't see how anybody could look at that and say that's bad. The only way this could possibly be a little negatively impactful is if you never cope with your own loss in this and you just throw everything into helping other people, but you never really help yourself. But overall, if you're going to have a defense mechanism, sublimation is like top notch. That's the good one. I mean, none of these are inherently bad or good, right? Just like our emotions, nothing is bad or good. It's what we do with it and how we express it. Okay. I said a lot of very big words there. That was a very wordy episode, but I hope it was helpful in some way, shape, or form to you. I have no doubt listening to that, there's one or two or all of those where you've said, oh, yep, done that. I've done almost all of those. And don't beat yourself up if you have. Again, none of these are inherently bad or good. They just are. And again, this is just our mind, our psyche trying to protect us from icky things. Okay? But like I said, you gotta feel it to heal it. So don't forget that. Okay. That is enough of that. This episode is getting long enough as it is. So let me move on, now that we're at the end of the episode, to the the death deck. Woot. Okay. Shuffle up the cards here. Pull one at random. Ooh, okay. Oh, I don't know if I've got time for this, but as if describing a scene in a movie, share a real story of when you almost died, or at least thought you might. So there has been 3-4 times in my life where I have almost died. And I'm still here. I could do full hour-long episodes on all of those, and I'm not going to sit here and describe it like I'm describing a scene in a movie, but the most recent one, I was in a really bad car accident in 2018. I had just paid off my car. That was the only car that I had paid for, financed, bought, paid off with my own money in my entire life. And then like a month after I paid it off, I got into an accident. I was at a weird intersection that kind of jogs, and I was pulling out the left turn, didn't see somebody coming, and they were coming fast. They T-boned me, driver's side. I didn't even know what was happening until it was over. I looked, all the airbags got off. He hit me so hard that my glasses flew off my face. All my airbags went off, and the seat shifted off of its track. My hip hit the center console and broke it, and yet I walked away from that accident without a scratch. My car did not. It was totaled. I was so mad. I had to go buy another car. And that was a grief. Honestly, that was a grief because I was so thrilled with that car. It was the first car I ever bought on my own as an adult. And then I had to go and start all over again. I saved up for so long to get that car. I had to start over with no savings. But anyway, I walked away without a scratch. That's what's important. That's what matters. That accident should have killed me, and it didn't. I'm still shocked. I sat there in the car. I was more stunned than anything, and there were people starting to gather around. They're like, oh my God, I don't think she's okay. And I'm like, I'm okay. I just needed a second because I was so shocked and stunned by everything. But there you go. That was the time I almost died. You know what? I always say after these, I'd love to hear your answer to the death deck. If you want to share that story, I'm happy to hear it. But that's, if you don't want to share a story about a time you almost died, that's okay too. But if you do want to share something, you can reach out to me at any time through my website, nikkithedeathdoula.com. I would love to hear from you. If you have an idea for the show, if you'd like to be on the show, please reach out to me. You can also find me on social media. I'm on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok, all at Nikki the Death Doula. All right. I'm kind of tired of hearing my own voice right now, and this has gone on long enough. So with that, I hope you have an amazing week. And remember, your grief is yours. Feelings are valid. Grief doesn't always have to suck. Good Grief with Nikki the Death Doula is produced by Nikki Smith of Nikki the Death Doula LLC in Columbus, Ohio. Nikki the Death Doula LLC is for consulting, education, emotional support, and guidance, and is no way considered a funeral establishment or licensed mental health establishment. Scripts, editing, sound design, literally everything with this podcast is done solely by Nikki Smith of Nikki the Death Doula LLC, with the exception of the music. The music is Cheery Monday by Kevin MacLeod. Licensing information can be found at filmmusic.io.